For 7 long years, God's people, the Israelites, were living in a terrible, scary story. The Midianites, a big and mean army, would come like hungry locusts. They would storm into the land and take everything. They took the food the people grew. They took the sheep and the donkeys. They left nothing behind but sadness and empty hands. The people of Israel were so very afraid. They didn't live in their nice houses anymore. No, that wasn't safe. They ran away to the mountains. They hid in caves and holes in the ground, like little scared animals. Imagine being so frightened that you couldn't even eat your dinner in your own home. That's how it was for God's children. They would plant their seeds and water them, hoping for a big harvest. But just when the food was ready, the Midianites would appear on the horizon, a dark cloud of dust and noise. They came on their camels more than anyone could count, and they trampled all the good things. The Israelites had forgotten about God. They had forgotten He was their rescuer. So they cried out to Him from their hiding places, their voices small and full of fear. Living in fear changes everything. It makes the world seem grey and small. The Israelites felt weak and helpless, like they were all alone. They couldn't fight back because the Midianite army was just too big, too strong, and too scary. So they hid. They hid from the danger, they hid from their enemies, and they hid from the life God wanted for them. Their hearts were filled with a deep dread that followed them from the moment they woke up until they fell into a restless sleep. They had lost their courage, and worst of all, they had lost their hope. This wasn't the life God had promised them. He had promised them a land of their own, a place filled with milk and honey, a place of peace and safety. But now their land was a place of fear and hunger. They were prisoners in their own home, always looking over their shoulders, always listening for the thunder of camel hooves. They needed a hero. They needed a rescuer. But they didn't know that God was already listening to their cries. He had a plan, a secret plan to save them. And His plan started with one very scared man. God's plan began with a man named Gideon. Gideon wasn't a king or a mighty warrior. He was just a farmer, the youngest in his family, and right now he was hiding. He was in a wine press, a deep pit used for squishing grapes, trying to beat out some wheat. He was doing it in secret so the Midianites wouldn't see him and steal the grain. He was afraid just like everyone else. He felt small and not at all brave. He was probably thinking about how unfair it all was, how scary the world had become. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared right there with him. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," the angel said. Gideon must have looked around. "Mighty warrior, who are you talking to?" he probably thought. He didn't feel mighty at all. He felt tiny. "If God is with us," Gideon said, his voice full of doubt, "then why are all these bad things happening? Where are all the wonderful miracles our fathers told us about?" He was confused and his heart was heavy with all the hiding and the running away. But God wasn't looking for someone who was already brave. He was looking for someone who would trust Him. The Lord looked at Gideon and said the most wonderful and terrifying thing. "Go in the strength you have," He said. "Save Israel from the hand of Midian. I am sending you." Gideon was shocked. Him. Save everyone. "But Lord," he stammered, "my clan is the weakest, and I'm the least in my family." He was making excuses, trying to explain to God that he had picked the wrong person for the job. He was not a hero, but God's answer was simple, and it was everything Gideon needed to hear. It was a promise. "I will be with you," God said. It wasn't about how strong Gideon was. It was about how strong God was. It wasn't about Gideon being a mighty warrior. It was about God being the mighty one who would fight for him. This one little promise, "I will be with you," was bigger than the whole Midianite army. It was a promise that could take Gideon's tiny bit of faith and turn it into world-changing courage. God was going to show everyone that His power works best in our weakness. So Gideon began to believe. He called for an army, and men from all over Israel came to help. A huge army gathered. There were 32,000 men ready to fight. Gideon must have looked at all those soldiers and felt a little bit better. With so many men, maybe, just maybe, they had a chance against the Midianites. It was a big army, full of swords and shields and hope. They were finally going to fight back. They were tired of hiding, and being afraid. But then God said something very strange. "Gideon," he said, "the army you have is too big." Too big? How could an army be too big, especially when they were facing an enemy as large as a swarm of locusts? God explained his plan. "If you win with this many men," he said, "the people will think they did it all by themselves. They will boast, 'My own strength has saved me.' I want them to know that I am the one who is saving them." God wanted to make it very, very clear that this was his victory, not man's. So God gave Gideon some instructions. "Tell anyone who is afraid that they can go home," God said. Gideon did as he was told. And guess what? 22,000 men walked away. They were too scared to fight. Now only 10,000 men were left. Gideon looked at his smaller army. He probably felt a little nervous, but 10,000 was still a lot of men. But God said, "There are still too many." God wanted an army so small that only a miracle could save them. God told Gideon to take the men down to the water to drink. He said, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel down to drink." Most of the men knelt down, putting their faces in the water, but 300 of them scooped up the water in their hands and lapped it, staying alert and watching for danger. And God said, "With these 300 men, I will save you." 300 men against an entire nation of warriors. It was an impossible plan, but with God, impossible is where the fun begins. The plan God gave Gideon was not a normal battle plan, it was a God plan. He didn't tell the 300 men to sharpen their swords. Instead, he told them to get empty clay jars, torches to hide inside the jars, and trumpets. That was it. Jars, torches, and trumpets against an army with swords and spears. It must have sounded crazy. But Gideon and his men had learned to trust God, even when his plan didn't make any sense. They were ready to let God be their strength. In the middle of the night, Gideon and his tiny army crept down and surrounded the giant Midianite camp. The enemy soldiers were all fast asleep, dreaming of all the things they would take the next day. On Gideon's signal, all 300 men did 3 things at once. They smashed their clay jars. Crash! They held up their fiery torches. Whoosh! And they blew their trumpets. Blare! Then they all shouted as loud as they could, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The night exploded with light and sound. The sleeping Midianites woke up in total chaos and confusion. It was dark, but they saw lights flashing all around them. They heard trumpets blasting from every direction. It sounded like a massive army was attacking them from all sides. In their panic and fear, they started fighting each other in the dark. They ran for their lives, tripping over each other, completely defeated, not by a big army, but by their own terror. God had used light and sound to win the battle for his people, without them even lifting a sword. And just like that, the war was over. The terrible, scary story had a happy ending. Because Gideon trusted God, Israel was saved, and the land had peace for 40 long years. This story teaches us beautiful things. First, God loves to choose unlikely people, like a scared farmer hiding in a pit, to do amazing things. Second, faith is stronger than fear. A little bit of trust in a big God can make you brave. And third, we don't need to be strong enough because God's strength is always enough for us. His power shines brightest when we are weak. What do you think? Has God ever asked you to do something that felt too big or too scary? Remember Gideon and his little army of 300. If you enjoyed this story of faith, be sure to subscribe and give it a like. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.